Welcome to a Summer Solutions segment on taxation. Yes, that's right, taxation. A matter that has triggered more revolutions than perhaps any other. We live in a world, once again, of taxation without representation. Study after study has shown that in the U.S., for example, the ordinary tax-paying voter, schmuck, has precisely zero impact on legislative outcomes. Instead, the biggest corporations, the richest elite, actually write most legislation and all trade deals despite paying relatively little, if anything, in taxes. The past few years has seen WikiLeaks, SwissLeaks, LuxLeaks, Panama Papers expose how the other half of 1% lives tax-free. If you're subject to payroll taxes, you're not one of these half percenters. Time now to turn to Dominic Frisby to talk taxation. Dominic, welcome to the Kaiser Report.
Thank you very much, Max. Thank you, Stacey.
Love the
Pleasure to be
suit.
here.
It's fantastic.
Thank you. From Dashing Tweeds.
I wonder what the taxes were on that.
Considerable.
Considerable. So, Dominic Frisby, you're going to be at the Edinburgh Festival. I was going to say film festival, but the comedy festival.
Yeah, the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, yeah.
You're mixing taxation and comedy. Tell us about the show.
Well, it's... I was thinking about what to write my next book about, and I figured I should write it about tax. And then I thought, I should do a show about tax as well. And in kind of starting to research it, I've realised what an enormous subject it is. Tax is the defining issue of our day. As you said in your introduction, Max, there is a tax story behind most revolutions. Tax is how you shape a society and you shape how people behave. Tax is tax is as much a part of our lives as eating, drinking, sleeping. Any activity you can think of involves
But at
tax.
the core of the social contract between the governed and the governors is the medium of taxation.
Absolutely, and they call that the contract at the heart of society, except it's not a contract, because a contract is between two voluntary parties, and there's nothing voluntary about tax.
It was quite voluntary in America for a very long time. It was we had sin taxes, they called them, up until 1913 when they introduced the income tax. And if you look at this chart, from 1952 to 2015, you see that corporate tax has declined and personal income taxes has increased. The payroll taxes and the income tax. So
labourers pay a disproportionate amount of tax, and everyone else gets off scot-free. Assets, whether it's bonds or stocks or houses, they go completely untaxed.
But if you watch the news, you would think otherwise. So here in the UK, for example, we have this big Google tax situation. George Osborne said he got a good deal, and then the French got a way better deal. But one of the arguments they say is, we can't tax corporations because then they'll leave our country. Of course, the ordinary citizen can't ever do that. They can't say to IRS or HMRC, well, you know what, I don't like the tax rate, I'm going to move to, China, because of the restrictions on citizenship.
That's absolutely right. They tax where they can. And corporations are much harder to tax. If you're a labourer, you are a captive market. And in fact, tax is one of the biggest causes of the inequality gap, because the ordinary people pay a disproportionate amount of tax.
It also factors into what happens. Einstein referred to compounding rates of return as the strongest force in the universe. And if you don't pay tax, your compounded rate of return goes up exponentially.
Absolutely, and if you do pay tax, the compounding effect happens in the opposite direction. Do you know how much of your life the average worker, maybe you two aren't the average worker, but the average worker, how many years of his life he works effectively without pay in order to honour his side of the contract at the heart of society?
25.
Absolutely right.
You guess it.
Bingo.
But Americans, remember, we pay taxes globally, so we're the worst of them all. But we saw it with WikiLeaks. When WikiLeaks released all those documents, it caused what they said was the Arab Spring, because people saw how Ben Ali in Tunisia lived, and they were taxed. Remember, the fruit seller was harassed by the police. We've seen what other revolutions say. How does tax relate to, say, World War I?
Yeah, let's play a little game of tax event bingo with the tax history expert, Dominic Frisby. We'll name the event. You tell us how tax factors into it. Now, you just said
World War I.
World War I.
Because everybody thinks it's about some dude who shot a duke, right?
Well, the tax story behind World War I is that behind most wars, a country goes into a war in order to plunder and then levy a tax. That is the motivation behind most conquests. And that's why Germany entered that war. They thought they would pay for the war with the plunder of victory. And so they funded that war purely on government debt.
Quick digression. The Iraq invasion was going to be self-funded from the oil.
Well, there you
Remember?
go.
Yeah,
There's,
I remember
there's,
that
there's
as well,
another
too.
example. The British paid income tax. The Americans also paid a little bit of income tax, and we were better funded. And one of the reasons the German armies lost is that they ran out of funds quicker than we did.
'Cause they didn't have
an
income tax.
Income
Okay.
tax helped win that war.
Wow. Okay, that's an interesting point. Let's
Name another.
Let's name another. Jesus Christ, the birth of Jesus Christ.
Mary and Joseph were on their way to pay tax.
No way.
That's why they were going to Bethlehem.
and
'Cause
was
there
there
was a
some
decree
sort of
from Caesar Augustus, and that's where there was that huge movement of people. They're all going to pay tax.
So, in modern Europe, we see many nations have tax incentives to have babies. Was this a tax incentive? Were they going to get a
Is
tax
Jesus
credit?
an anchor baby?
I don't think they were going to get a tax credit. They were on their way to pay tax. And in fact, there's a tax story behind Judaism. The reason Moses led the Hebrews out of Egypt was to escape the burden of taxation. There's a tax story behind Islam. In the 7th century, if you converted to Islam, you were given exemption from taxes. And so everyone thought, great, I'm converting to Islam. That's one of the reasons for the rise of Islam.
You mentioned about taxes not being voluntary. However, in Islam, there is the tradition of the tithing that
Yeah.
is voluntary.
And also in Christianity, there's a tradition of the tithe. And that was levied at 10%. And in those days, the church would look after care, education, and those kind of things, and you would give the church 10% of your
Now,
earnings,
looking at
as
the
opposed to
chart-
50% now.
So
Yeah.
looking at the chart again, this is, I think, maybe you can comment this. Tax can create social engineering. You know what I'm saying? You can shape society in a way that's is not coercive. It's not violent. It's subtle.
Why do you think we have such a buy-to-let craze in this country?
Talk about that.
Yes, it's through the taxes that
Yeah.
this has created it.
It's tax and money creation, but buy-to-let is one of the few ways that ordinary people can get exposure to this incredible money supply growth.
Well, explain
And they
buy-to-let
don't
briefly,
pay-
just for the global audience here.
What that means?
Yeah.
Well, the money supply is going up at an exponential rate every year, and effectively that means the money that you have buys you less and less. And most of newly created money goes into property.
So
And
people buy these properties and let them out. That's their
they let them
intention.
out, but they get the rise in value of the asset in the property. It goes untaxed,
Yeah.
and it also rises at a similar rate to money supply growth.
But every single one of these big leaks that cause all these huge headline stories, the Panama Papers, the Lux leaks, the Swiss leaks, everybody acts all shocked. Oh my God, the rich don't pay any taxes. That's always obvious, and then it peters out because, of course, the rich run the country and they don't want anybody to address it. But here in the United Kingdom, David Cameron admitted that he was an investor. He held shares in one of these offshore companies. Now, isn't that a little bit bizarre when the guy who's like basically in charge of HMRC and sends the police after you to force you to pay your taxes, it's not something he wants to do. How to solve this problem of the tax burden, especially in an aging world and in a world where we're at never-ending war, because war does cost a lot of money. How to shift the burden off of labor?
Well, you're absolutely right. It is a major, major problem. It is the defining economic headache of our days. One thing, in my opinion, governments need to spend less. They need to stop taxing labour and tax other things. I would like to see a land value tax. 70% of land in the UK is owned by less than 6,000 people. If we had a land value tax, do you know who'd pay the most tax? The Queen. Do you know who'd pay the next most tax? The Duke of Edinburgh. The Duke of Westminster. Yeah. You know, why does land go untaxed? Tax land, not labour. However, what they will do, which is never what they should do, as we know, is they will end up taxing land and labour. They will tax everything in order to try and cover. We're seeing a massive global tax grab to try and solve this great big black hole in public finances.
Speaking of history of tax, what about Henry VIII, his relationship with the church? Essentially, he dismantled the Catholic Church as a tax play, essentially.
Tax is power.
In Napoleon, there was a huge tax play.
Well, the funny thing about Napoleon was that all the tax collectors in France had been beheaded after the French Revolution, and Napoleon
they were smart,
had,
those French people.
they were enlightened, and so Napoleon.
Well,
had
the
no
recipe for coq au vin sometimes demands the head of a tax collector. You know, it's all in the recipe there. You got to be authentic.
But Napoleon had no one to collect taxes for him. The British levied an income tax to pay for the Napoleonic Wars. And again, we were better funded than he was.
Now, of course, I've lived in America and worked in America, and I've lived here and worked here in continental Europe and here. And it seems pretty much that I pay the same tax either way. But in Europe, I do see a lot in exchange for that tax. I do have like I can go to the hospital and there's not a vast Kafkaesque labyrinth of bureaucracy in order to see whether or not I could be covered for, say, that pneumonia, whether my insurance policy covers that. I see high-speed rail. I see infrastructure like that. In America, like, you see nothing at all. The roads are dilapidated. Most of the bridges are rated D or F and are ready to collapse. There's no healthcare system that you can access. You don't really see anything, but you do see the headlines that somebody's been hit by a drone strike, and we allegedly took out some leader of some group that we don't like. But what about that getting something in return with?
Well, the American military complex, biggest employer in the world, funded solely from the proceeds of tax.
Yeah, 50% of the U.S. tax goes to Pentagon, which is like $1.5 trillion or so.
You could save on the tax bill if you spent less on your wars.
Well, that's not going to happen. We've got to build that wall.
Oh, okay, yeah.
We're going to make America great again. We need to build walls, so they need to collect more taxes.
Yeah.
Now, Edinburgh is the premier theater music festival in the world.
Biggest arts festival in the world.
Biggest in the world. You're going to be up there this August.
Your
show is all about tax.
It is. It's called Let's Talk About Tax.
Of course, Adam Smith is buried there. It's
Absolutely.
not a very big. It's not like a tourist attraction, a big one. But what would he have said about the solution to what we have right now in terms of taxation?
He would say tax less, tax land, and
tax land is never going to happen because we are now, that's the last thing standing in our economies.
Yeah.
We only have bubbles and property bubbles, and there are no jobs to go to. So if you tax land, people will suddenly say, that will really cause a revolution because they'll be like, wait, we don't have any jobs. What are we going to live off of now?
Let me get your response to this. Bono, the lead singer of U2, says that Ireland's tax evasion schemes are the only thing for corporations, the only thing the country has to offer because they have no natural resources.
Well, they have a great deal of talent to offer, but certainly Ireland's favourable tax schemes have been one of the reasons that Ireland is now in the top 10 richest countries in the world on a per capita basis.
Well, on that note, I think we're going to...
No taxation without representation.
Yeah.
That's it.
Debt, by the way, is taxation without representation. You had no right to vote on that debt when it was taken on. And
We're
yet
like
now we must pay the interest
Ben
on it.
Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and George Washington. Let's John Adams. Let's declare a revolution right here.
Let's cross the Thames in an open boat.
Hey, can I say, anarchists, of which I'm an anarchist, by the way, always, activists, they always go, so-and-so should pay more tax, so-and-so should pay more tax. If you want to bring down the system, starve the monster.
Yeah.
Don't pay tax.
Let's go to the second half.
I'd like to thank our guest, Dominic Frisby, who will be at the, as we say in America, Edinburgh Festival in August. Check him out. He's frickin' hilarious. Bye, y'all. Welcome to this segment of the Kaiser Report Summer Solutions Series. Honoré de Balzac said, quote, laws are spider webs through which the big flies pass and the little ones get caught. A strange spider web indeed, but one which makes perfect sense when justice is just so darn expensive. Should justice only be available for the wealthy? What about those too poor to sue a big corporation or the state? Funding trials for profit is actually a thing now. For quite a while, it has provided big profits for a select few hedge fund investors. But the practice has only recently hit mainstream news when it emerged that billionaire Peter Thiel had financed Hulk Hogan's trial against Gawker Media. But what about the little guy? Time now to go to Los Angeles and talk to Anush Hakimi of TrialFunder.com, a site that crowdfunds the cost of justice. Anush, welcome to the Kaiser Report.
Hey Max, great to be here with you.
All righty, so the new investment area of funding trials has received a whole lot of attention recently due to Peter Thiel's financing of the Hulk Hogan versus Gawker trial. And so we wanted to get into this. Tell us about TrialFunder.com. How does it work?
So TrialFunder.com is an online marketplace where people can invest in the future payout of other people's lawsuits. So the platform is really intended to solve for multiple problems that we identified. On the one hand, my co-founder and I are both attorneys who practiced law each for over a decade. And we noticed that there was a huge problem in the American legal system. And essentially, in a nutshell, put simply, the legal system is broken. So what happens is you have deep-pocketed bad actor defendants spending billions of dollars engaging in protracted litigation with the ultimate goal of breaking down the plaintiff so that the plaintiff is financially crippled and either goes away with their tail tucked between their legs or accepts a low settlement offer at a fraction of the lawsuit's value. The net result is that justice isn't served and bad actor defendants are emboldened and can act with impunity. Litigation finance levels the playing field. So that's one problem that we identified that's being solved by our platform. Another problem that we identified was that after 2008, investors were seeking non-market correlated investment opportunities with high returns. And litigation finance is the only truly non-market correlated investment asset class that's out there right now. But so we did a little bit of digging, and we noticed that for litigation finance investment opportunities, most investors could not get in because the large hedge funds that were trading in litigation had such high minimum buy-ins that it was essentially limited to institutional investors to participate. So we came up with TrialFunder.com as a solution to both of these problems. Now, investors can invest in highly profitable, non-market correlated litigation finance investments online securely in the comfort of their own home with very low minimum buy-ins. And it's not just the high profits and the non-market correlation that's great about investing in litigation finance at TrialFunder.com. It's also that every time an investor invests in a litigation finance investment through our site, a previously disenfranchised plaintiff or group of plaintiffs will get the justice that they're legally entitled to. So there's a real social justice component to what we're doing. And there's also systemic benefits. The bad behavior of deep-pocketed defendants is curbed. I mean, let's say you have a drug company, for example, that's producing a drug on the market that has undisclosed serious side effects. If litigation finance pushes up the settlement value or the award that eventually comes out with the verdict, that bad behavior is going to be curbed in the future. So what you have is that drug company is going to be more cautious in the future, which means for the rest of us, safer drugs moving forward. There's also another systemic benefit that's often overlooked, which has to do with the society's belief in the efficacy of the legal system. So, what happens when a defendant, a deep-pocketed defendant, steamrolls financially over thousands of plaintiffs in a judicial action? You have thousands more Americans that believe the legal system is rigged against the little guy, and it just doesn't work for the little guy. Litigation finance acts as a counterbalance to that point of view. So that, in a nutshell, is essentially what we're doing at TrialFunder.com.
Okay, well, I first heard about these types of cases a few years ago when hedge funds started investing in divorce cases. And this seemed to be the beginning of this idea of seeking this type of hedge fund money to get involved in the legal system. Now, when you're talking about hedge funds, and this is kind of interesting, and you mentioned this non-correlated rate of return a couple of times there. I mean, hedge funds are mercenaries. They don't have any allegiance to anybody but themselves, and they're just looking for a rate of return. And so they're not looking at the case in terms of who's right or who's wrong. They just want to seek a return. And so it's a pool of money that is sitting there waiting to be leveraged in a way that you guys have with the platform to find a price for justice. So what you're describing is that justice is mispriced in America. And here you are allowing justice to be repriced in a way that offers a genuine balancing of the scales. You know, the symbol for justice is the woman, the blind woman holding the scales. And for too long, one scale, you know, they've been completely out of balance, and you guys seem to be seeking to balance the scales of justice. Would you agree with that?
That's absolutely correct. You know, that actually dovetails on another important point when discussing litigation finance. Litigation finance certainly has its detractors, and primarily they fall into two groups. It's people that are either completely ignorant of the industry and the benefits that can come from it, or they're lobbyists for the people who are already spending hundreds of billions of dollars on the defense side in litigation. So this solution really is a free market approach to solve a systemic issue in the legal system, which is that there's a lot of capital coming in on the defense side, and there hasn't been an avenue historically to get capital in on the plaintiff side. So we're essentially opening up the asset class for investment, which has the throw-off benefit of producing justice and leveling the scales of justice.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about some other trends here that overlap what you guys are doing and get your thoughts on it. So the Republican and the Democratic National Conventions are nearing, and we've seen a new trend by cities hosting these conventions to take out insurance to cover the planned police violence and violation of protesters' constitutional rights. So in other words, the cities plan on the police violating people's constitutional rights, and they take insurance out ahead of the conventions. So they're essentially buying impunity from law breaking and giving the police a clear shot at breaking the law, and they're positioned to do that ahead of the conventions. And you guys kind of take on some of these police brutality cases is some of the stuff you're looking at. Can you comment on this?
So, you know, what the cities are doing is they're anticipating a risk that's going to come, and they're hedging their downside risk, which is something that they should be doing if they're the administrators of the city's assets and basically charged with governing the welfare of the city. In that regard, I understand what they're doing. If it has the effect of increasing police impunity, then that's not a good thing. I don't know whether that's going to be the ultimate outcome of it. I guess that remains to be seen.
Let me jump in here for a second, because we've already seen this at the last round of political conventions, and the violence factor went up. And in economics, this would be called moral hazard. If there's a way to constantly bail out bankers with free money and you don't apply the rule of law, you're going to get more crime. So let's disabuse ourselves of the notion that this may or may not increase police violence. It does, it will, and it seems like this is the bottom line in a scare tactic almost against free speech. So this is to be avoided in my view, but you are taking on or focused on police brutality cases generally. Is that correct? Is that because, why is that?
We have taken on police brutality matters in the past. In fact, the first matter that we funded on our platform was a police brutality case. It was a civil rights case involving a 63-year-old man who was abused on video, and there was multiple witness videos that captured it. The city and the police department refused to settle because this is the typical defense posturing until we got to the eve of trial. The economics of why the plaintiff actually needed the financing was it speaks to the heart of litigation finance, which is you have small firms that have multiple matters that have to come out of pocket to front the hard costs of the litigation. So we had taken this matter on. We raised $20,000 in 3 days from our investors. The case settled 9 months later, resulting in 147% ROI for our investors, and 108.75%. No, 108.75% ROI and 147% IRR for our investors within a 9-month period. So it was a tremendous win for us. It was a tremendous win for the plaintiff, who wouldn't have seen justice had it not been for the litigation finance that was available.
All right, fair enough. Well, we have to cut it off there. Thanks so much for being on the Kaiser Report Summer Solutions, Anesh Hakimi with the TrialFunder.com.
Thank you, Max. Thanks for having me.
That's it for this episode of the Kaiser Report with me, Max Kaiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Anesh Hakimi of TrialFunder.com. If you'd like to get in touch, tweet us at Kaiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.